Okay. Good. Good afternoon and welcome to our meeting of the Joint Standards Committee this Tuesday afternoon, the 21st of November. I want to welcome you, those that are in the room and those of you that are watching either live or on catch-up. We welcome you also. So just turning to the agenda, item number 1, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest around the table? No. Just to say at this point that we are still expecting one other member of the committee, so Joe Leach, but we have been informed that he will be a little bit late, but Joe will join us as soon as he can. Item number 2, exclusion of the press and public. We will have as much of this meeting in the public arena as we can, but there are certain items when it comes to the monitoring officer's report to us that are not redacted, and therefore we need to discuss those in private because it does name names. There is a list that is not in the private domain within your agenda pack, and we will just discuss that at the relevant time. But I just need your permission to exclude the press and public halfway through kind of item number 9 on the agenda. So can I just have an agreement on that? Lovely, thank you very much. That's good. Just coming to the apologies and the list of attenders. So I do have apologies from Councillor Fisher, who is being substituted by Councillor Fenton. Good afternoon, Councillor Fenton. Councillor Lomas is being substituted by Councillor Melly, so good to have you with us. And Councillor Pavlovic is being substituted by Councillor Baxter. And so good to have you with us. Thank you very much for that. So there are no other absences. I think it would be good for me at this point, just for those of you who aren't familiar with people around the table. I think we all know Jane. Jane has looked after us, done a sterling job, and hopefully will continue to do so. But her colleague to her right is Ben. So Ben, good to see you. Good to have you with us. And as if by magic, Joe has turned up. Joe, good evening. Thank you. We're just going through the apologies and the introductions around the table. So good to see you. So Ben is new to the council, new to Democratic Services, and we may well be seeing more of Ben over the weeks and months to come. But it's good to have you with us, Ben, and everybody else around the table is known to us, so that's fine. I have one other apology. Sorry, forgive me. Parish Councillor Stuart Rawlings does send his apologies, and at the moment we don't have a facility whereby parish councillors can have a substitute. I know that's an issue that we've tried to resolve in the past, but with no success, and it may well come up again at some point. But Councillor Rawlings sends his apologies. I understand that he's in some warm climate at the moment, so there we go. I doubt very much that he's watching online. So thank you for that. So moving on to item number 3 on the agenda, which is the minutes of the previous meeting. Thank you so much for accepting my apologies. I as a chair of this committee, I strive to be here at every meeting. There are occasions when I can't be, and I am ably assisted by our vice chair, Councillor Warby, who chaired that meeting for us. So you have the minutes there. I wasn't present, so I therefore can't say whether they're an accurate reflection of the meeting. For those of you that were at that meeting, can you just have a look at those and let me know, A, if there's any changes or amendments that need to be annotated, and B, if it is an accurate. I did watch it, by the way, I did watch it online afterwards. That's how sad I am. But I did, not that watching a committee is sad by any stretch of the imagination. For those of you that were present, you're happy for me to sign? I know this is inaccurate. Yeah, let me thank you, Carol. Okay. So that brings us on to item number 4 of the agenda. I haven't been informed of any urgent business at this stage, so there won't be any. Item number 5, public participation. I haven't been informed of any public participants this afternoon, so we'll move swiftly on to item number 6, which is the member induction programme. Again, just before I hand over to Francis, so you'll remember that those of you that have been on this committee for some time will remember that we were really keen as a committee to see a robust member induction programme instigated here within the council, not just for new members, but actually for some of those members that maybe need a bit of a refresher and a bit of a top up, and so that's why the member induction programme came to be. And so I'll just hand over to Francis if you want to speak to this. Francis, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Then if you have a short report from me and then some material which was written by Claire Fowle, who was effectively the coordinator for the member induction programme, and she did that role with the support of a number of officers across the council, and of course members had input into the content of the induction programme. Clearly this committee has a special interest in the element of the programme which covers standards, and the code of conduct and standards generally did feature quite heavily in the member induction programme. It's important therefore for this committee to consider whether those parts of the induction programme within its particular sphere of interest are considered to have been effective, whether there needs to be more or less, taking into account the feedback that has been received from members as a whole on the induction programme. At this committee, one of the themes and one of the concerns has been how a standards committee can have best impact where the standards regime was drastically rolled back in terms of its power following the Localism Act in 2011 and the removal of the very impactful sanctions. And it has been a theme of discussion that information, training are the better tools that this committee has, bearing in mind sanctions at the other end of the scale are very weak. So a focus on what this committee can do to ensure that the right information is out there, that standards are promoted, is a key part of this committee's role. So a matter for discussion and feedback, so that the next member induction programme and indeed the ongoing induction programme can be as effective as possible. Accessibility is just one special thing to note, I suppose, about the programme. The content is one thing, but the mode of delivery, there was very clear effort to ensure that members could attend in whatever way best suited them. So the sessions were all either, I think the majority of the sessions were offered as an in-person opportunity, as a join at home opportunity, or as a catch-up later opportunity. And that resource bank of materials still exists and has actually been used by officers to help deliver value for money. So,
lovely. Thank you very much, Francis. Anybody have any comments or thoughts? Or Joe? So Joe, and then Councillor Millie.
Chair, as an outsider, there are a number of thoughts. I mean, one is that quite a lot of the appendices don't actually tell you very much, because it has a table, very impressive looking table with 3 or 4 people on it, and it really doesn't mean very much. But when you hone down to the way the information is summarised, there is a table on page 12 which shows the registered attendance by groups. And this will come across as a political point, but it isn't, because I ain't a politician. But there are 200 Labour attendances and 25 Lib Dem attendances. And to putting it in as indirect way as possible, I suggest it's worth discussing with the Lib Dem leadership group why they don't feel that they should be attending, because of the comment that Francis just made. It was an attempt to move from attempting to have sanctions to attempting to have education. And education only works if someone turns up to be educated. So that let's say a lot of the tables were in vast amounts of detail, didn't tell you very much. That is a summarized table, and it appears to tell me that there is an issue, which is a differential level of attendance. There may be a second issue, which is even that the Labour attendances may be too low, because you could follow through some of the other things and think that the total attendances were actually still quite low. So it's a two-stage issue, really.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Joe. So I am going to ask Councillor Runciman to come in, but before that, without wanting to steal too much of your thunder, okay. Can you hear me? That's not unusual. If you haven't hit your microphone, please remember to do that when you are speaking. And if you can, try and speak up for Councillor, I don't know if you want to come back in on what Joe's just said. Yeah, but let me just, before you do, because I don't want to steal too much of your thunder, because I think I know what you're going to say. So I'm not here to defend a political position, and I don't think any of us around the table are in that sense. But what I would say that this table shows you, it reflects the number of new councillors into a particular group. So the Labour group had by far the biggest number of new first-time councillors into their group in May. I think we had one new councillor, and I think the Lib Dems had only two. Just one. Well, of course, yes, because Councillor Healy had only one. So I think when we look at stuff like this, we just need to bear that in mind. Whilst the training induction is not exclusively for new councillors, we recognise that the impetus is for the newer councillors to get involved in the training. Other parts of the training are available for existing councillors as and when needed. And I suspect what we will see with this document as we move forward, we will see this document will change as more of these established councillors realise they need to pick up certain elements of the training. And that's the good thing about the training being available, not just now and live, but in the future for catch-ups. Councillor Runciman.
Yes, I back up what you say completely. There's one new councillor in our group. All the others have been on, some of us for quite a long time. And I think perhaps what needs doing next time, no laughing from you, is the need to indicate if there's new material there. If the laws have changed, I don't know if I don't do planning, but say if the planning laws have changed, sure, then in the blurb for that training session, it needs to say planning laws have changed, we suggest you attend, or something like that. But other than that, I mean, I did quite a lot of training myself because all of these I've done before. And I wouldn't, if it was names, I wouldn't appear anywhere. The fact that I was doing LGA and LGIU training at the same time, of course, is not indicated here. No, thank you.
Thank you. Joe, before I do, I want to bring Councillor Melly in, and then I'll give you a right to reply. Councillor Melly.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I agree that attendance overall across all parties is lower than it should be. Not a party political point. Across all parties, it should be higher. The induction programme isn't finished yet. We have until December, so I hope the numbers will be higher by then. There was a lot of content, and a lot of it, it wasn't highly attended in person, so that hopefully people are watching it at home, and there's so many sessions, hopefully people will get around to it before December. And but maybe within our groups, we just need to remind everyone. I thought that the induction programme this time was much better than it was 4 years ago. I think there's still a lot of room for improvement, but I found it much more comprehensive. And we've already mentioned more new councillors. There's so much to learn. There's so many different kind of policy areas and departments in the council. There's so much to learn, and I feel like it was much more comprehensive this time than it was when I was a new councillor. It is a lot of content. It is a lot of time and effort to attend all these sessions, and some of them were quite long. But having looked through it all, I'm not sure what would necessarily be cut or shortened. Like I said, I think there is still areas for improvement, but I think all of that actually has been quite captured quite well in the report. Thank you for the report. My particular concerns were about accessibility, which Francis has already touched on, and things like accessing Milo and Microsoft Teams and that sort of thing, which just made it a little bit difficult to actually attend some of the sessions, which meant that people not only then couldn't attend sessions that they wanted to, I think it also made it difficult for officers to find out who had actually completed training that they needed to complete. I think that some things actually were quite clear, things like planning training and licensing training and code of conduct, it was very clear that it was mandatory, whether you're a new councillor or not. They were mandatory trainings that you have to attend if you're on, well, planning and licensing, you have to attend if you're on those committees, and code of conduct is mandatory to redo, is it once a year or something like that. So I think actually that was quite clear. I don't think it needs to be clearer whether you have to attend or not, because you have to attend. That's quite clear. Yeah, looking at the table that's been mentioned on page 12 of the attendance at all the sessions, yeah, some of that's quite concerning, like code of conduct training, for example. Less than half of councillors having attended it, even though that's mandatory. So maybe we need to look at, if a training's mandatory, how we make sure that councillors complete it. Because if you can get away with just not doing it, then it's not mandatory, is it? And things like, so licensing and regulatory committee training, for example. I'm chair of that committee. So before we had our first decision-making meeting, I checked with Democratic Services that everyone had definitely completed the training. And I think there was quite a lot of work to chase people, because it was difficult to know whether people had completed it or not. You know, if somebody wasn't able to didn't attend in person and wasn't able to log into Milo and had just watched it on a YouTube link, it's difficult to know that they've done it. And that created work to check. And I was told that everyone had completed it. But on here on this table, it says that at least one person hasn't. So there's 15 people on the committee, and only 14 people in total out of 47 have completed it. So I think there's things that we need to look into on there. But yes,
totally agree. I'm going to come back to you. I think one of the things as well, before I do, is again, we have to understand that the committee structure that we have within the council is proportionate. So it would be pointless, for example, for some groups or individuals that will not have a place on certain committees to do the committee training. It seems a pointless act. I think Councillor Millie's point is very important about the mandatory attendance that hasn't happened. Joe, back to you, sir.
I was looking at this as if I've been given a report on training. It wouldn't matter what the organisation was, and it's reporting back who has done what training. I would link it in this particular case to the views of the local government association people who came in to provide some advice to the council about its skill set, or in fact, because of issues that have arisen, its lack of skill sets around certain things. And some training needs to be repeated regularly. I've been a non-executive director of charities and all sorts of other things, and I was expected to do certain forms of training. No matter how much I whinged, I'd done it before, I was still expected to do some. So mandatory may not be the right word for something other than planning, but there ought to almost be some asterisk training which says, well, you may have done it 4 years ago, but you know, some things need to be reviewed, because that's the nature of the world moves. It's not about it being councils, it's not about it being a local authority, it's about it being a managed entity which has had some issues with its governance, and it's received advice. It should have certain forms of training. It's worked to construct that training program. It's acknowledged that there is a problem, and the problem is you're expecting a small number of people to do too much activity. That's fairly clear. But nevertheless, if everybody can't do it and you think it's all essential, then you've got a choice between you've got to concentrate it more, or you've got to somehow find a way of getting people to do more training, whether it's been done previously or not, unless you start saying, if you've done this once, you never need to do it again.
Okay, so thank you for your comments, Joe. Really appreciate your involvement there. Councillor Runciman.
Chair, I think the most important page is page 13. And I read through those lessons learned very carefully, more than once. And I think they're very informative.
Yeah.
And I hope that next time the programme is planned, all those points will be taken into account, because the people that wrote them obviously meant them. And they highlight some of the particular difficulties, like the mandatory versus optional.
Yeah.
Is mandatory essential? Well, it may or may not be. Mandatory actually is something quite clear. There are some things you have to do, like planning training. And you can't sit on planning if you don't do it. If we say things are essential, how essential are they? or are they desirable? I don't know. I think the terminology needs sorting out, quite
Sure.
frankly.
Yeah.
But I think those points there really are the fundamentals when
Yeah.
redrawing up the next training.
Yeah. Okay, thank you so much. I'm just aware that we haven't had any input from our parish councillors, not that you have to have any input, but is there anything that you feel that you want to add before I move us on? I'm going to suggest an outcome, but brilliant. Thank you, Chris. No, okay. What I'd like to suggest, if members are in agreement, is that as the chair of this committee, that I write to the group leaders and whips and just remind them of the requirements. Let them have this graph so that they can see it, and then we can review it again in January, and we'll just see if there's been any more uptake. Councilman, I think your point is valid, and again, Councilman, but all points around the table are really valid. But I think in terms of moving it forward, Councillor Fenton.
I think that's appropriate. If in that email you can also include some links that group leaders and whips can share with members of their group in terms of
Absolutely.
the training you miss is available online. This
Yeah.
is how you access it. This is how you log into Milo. If you're having problems logging into Milo, this is who you need to speak to. Otherwise, there's a risk that members will read it and think, well, I don't know how to access this, therefore I won't, or I'll wait till somebody tells me what to do. So I think that's a good suggestion, but if you can make it as easy as
Absolutely,
possible.
absolutely, very valid point. Thank you, Councillor Fenton, appreciate that.
Thank you, Chair. As part of the officer call that discussed the content of this and the style of delivery, there was some small discussion about incentivisation and, you know, how do you monitor? And I think, and it's come up around the table today, how do you force people to attend? Well, you can't force people to attend. You can incentivise, you can name and shame, you can publish the records of who's attended what in the way that you do for attendances at meetings. Officers didn't propose that that's what happened, you know, but members can consider whether that's, you know, something that they would want to do. I haven't myself done an exercise in comparison with other local authorities, what other local authorities do alongside their member profile, say attendance at training, blah, 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 whether that's a normal or an abnormal thing. And then for those people who do things like Duolingo or other sort of platform-based learning, you know, the concept of a profile, you know, of having a personalised profile as to how far you've gone, and almost a personalised report of what you've done, of how much is available. You know, those sorts of things are quite technically difficult, but again, the resources might be an issue. But would that be important to members to be able to see their own progress, and would that act as an incentivisation? Oh, I can see I've completed, you know, 40% of all available training. That's quite good. That puts me in a good position, or, you know, that's not really important to me.
Yeah, so if I might just give you my thoughts, then I'm happy to hear the thoughts of members. So I think it's almost like, for me, it's almost a two-step approach, because as soon as you make an individual's training record available to that individual, you're going to make it available to either their group leaders or their whips, and I kind of think that, you know, for me, I think it should be a step approach. I think you know, we've clearly highlighted that uptake of the training isn't where we want it to be. How do we get it where we want it to be? So for me, it's a bit of a step. So I think the first instance, let's do what we've said, with Councillor Fenton's fantastic suggestion there, and then obviously we can review it again in January, by which time the timescale for which people had to have done the training will have come and gone. And then if the next step is that we then look to have a training log available, my worry is that if we have a training log available, it will then be accessed not just by the individual, it will be accessed by officers, which I have no issue with, but it will be accessed by the group leadership and the whips. Councillor Huntsman.
Again, I agree with you, Chair. I think we have to be careful. Some people work, some people work unconventional hours and couldn't come because of that. Some people have caring responsibilities. in the day or immediately after work. I think the naming and shaming idea for me is a complete non-starter. I think it will put people off, and what we want to do is to encourage them.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. And in fairness to Francis, I don't think Francis was suggesting that the naming and shaming, but I think you're right. As soon as you go down the route of having a log of personal training available, that can then be accessed by people who potentially could name and shame. So I'd suggest we do a step approach. Let's take the first step that we've said we're going to do, which is to write to the group leaders and the whips, which I'll do this week with the information that we've got, and then we'll review it again in January, and then we'll kind of take it on from there. That's what I propose. Do I have I'm not going to go kind of a formal proposal in a second. Do I have an approval to move forward in that way? Just indicate those that. Thank you very much. Good. Go on, Francis.
Chair, thank you. Can I just say that wasn't a proposal I was tabling. I was stating when the question arose around the table, what do you do to incentivise people? I was listing a number of obvious measures which were debated and in fact were not put forward by the officers who put together the training programme, probably for several of the reasons that Councillor Lunsford identified. So I wasn't tabling a proposal, I was almost stating a tool that was available for members to consider.
Councillor Melling.
I'm not suggesting that a kind of a record of exactly what sessions every councillor has attended is made public, but I think that the record of who has attended what probably isn't 100% accurate. In fact, I know it's not 100% accurate. And I think people don't even have a way of checking their own training record to see whether it's correct, whether they're actually logged as having completed all the training that they have completed. So is there some way of doing that which isn't too labour intensive?
Brilliant. It is. Thank you. Thank you. So I'm going to move us on to item. Thank you very much, members, for that discussion. On to item number 7, which is the review of case handling procedures for complaints under the Member Code of Conduct. I'm going to hand over again to Francis to speak to this, but it's quite a chunk of information that you've got, but hopefully Francis can enlighten us a little bit more about what we're expected to do.
Thank you, Chair. So the amended procedure table today is a discussion draft. I'm calling it a discussion draft. It's for the members to throw around the table and say what they think. I've highlighted a few issues which are evident to me in my experience of working in the Standards Committee and which have come up in discussion over the past couple of years, from members, and they're the things which I've put in the table. Clearly, the legal position is that arrangements need not be as elaborate as they are in York. That's obvious. In terms of comparison with other authorities, they're also far more elaborate in York than they are in the 2 or 3 comparator authorities I've chosen. I've no doubt could choose more, and I'd be willing to place bets on us still falling at the more intensive end of the spectrum. The financial situation of the council is no secret. It is important to note that there is a resource implication for a very intensive standards procedure, which involves convening committees, regularly producing papers, etc., etc. So they're all considerations to bear in mind. The strict legal position is set out for members. The obvious thing to state is that since the Localism Act came in 2011, the ability to impose significant sanctions hasn't been there, and that does, I think, if we're honest, hamper the work of standards committees. So it has to make the best of what it has at its disposal, and it has to, certainly in my suggestion, make a statement that standards are important and the upholding of high standards are important. But doing that proportionately and within means is also important.
Okay, so I'm going to open it up for discussion. If any of the members have any comments or questions or anything that they want to just get some clarification on, I'm happy for you to raise your hand. I've got a few ideas, but I'd rather hear members. I think you've heard enough of me for a moment. Councillor Fenton.
Although I've been a councillor for 8 years, I've never attended one of these meetings, so it's all been quite quite new and interesting. I was trying to get my head around the proposal to differentiate between executive members and other members in terms of what I read as these almost the kind of fast track approach, where a complaint is lodged against an executive member, that would go straight to, it would bypass the initial review by monitoring officer in conjunction with independent person, I think. And I have some in principle concerns about treating different members differently. I think if you could end up with a situation where two members had been accused of a similar breach of the code of conduct, and those cases are handled differently. So I think just from in terms of treating members equally, regardless of their status within the council, would I, as a chair of a committee, fall within the fast track or the alternative stream? I just had some concerns about that particular proposal, but it'd be interesting to maybe learn a bit more about what prompted that.
Okay, thank you. You want to say it, Chris? No? You're rising his other. Oh, he's gonna.
I was thinking what I was actually doing in private was just thinking over some of the individual cases, and and when the descriptor is quite apt, I think, But I take your point entirely about the equality of treatment.
So I think there's only myself and Chris that were around the table, and more recently Mark, that were involved in the original discussions with this. I appreciate some members have been on this committee long before I ever donned a councillor lanyard, and I respect that. However, if I can just give you a précis as to how we got to where we're at, there was a situation where it was felt several years ago that the complaints procedure was not robust enough, and also potentially that certain members in executive positions could potentially put some form of pressure onto officers. Again, I'm not saying that happened. I'm saying that was the rationale behind the move, and so we, under the guidance of a previous monitoring officer, there were several options that were put onto the table, and I think the one that was finally agreed, so that we were seen to be fair to everybody. If I'm honest, I think it probably went a bit too far, which is why we've kind of reined back a little bit. We ended up with a situation where it was written into the procedures, it was approved by full council, because obviously any changes that we have to be approved by full council. We can't, as a committee, make any changes. So members around the table had an opportunity at full council to make their thoughts known. As it happened at those full council meetings, all the proposals just went through on the nod, and maybe that's something that we need to look at as a full council, but I'm digressing slightly. So the situation that we found ourselves in was, under the procedures, when the constitution was rewritten a number of years ago, was that if you were an executive member, a shadow executive member, a chair, that you would automatically go to a subcommittee rather than the initial screening that was happening at the time. And the rationale behind that decision was that if you are in a position of authority, you receive an SRA, for example, that you should be held to a higher level of accountability. And that's not to say that you have done anything different from a standard member, but it was deemed at the time that you should be judged to a higher standard of accountability. And that was the rationale behind it. Thankfully, we've kind of rolled back from that, because it actually got quite silly, really. And so, you know, I was in the previous administration, I was an opposition spokesman for several portfolios. You can understand, we're just having two of us, that we had half portfolios each. Would that mean that if I had been complained against, I would automatically have had to go to a subcommittee? I was, and I don't mind admitting that I was the subject of a complaint whilst I was the chair of this committee under that procedure, which scared the pants off me because it went straight to a subcommittee for something that I absolutely would never have gone to a subcommittee had that rule not been in. So I myself have fallen foul to that. So I'm happy to see the changes, and but I think we just need to be careful that we don't go back to what we had before, and that we have some level of accountability. Councillor Runciman.
I was very concerned indeed to work out that this also applies to chairs of parish councils. I'll put my bottom dollar on the fact that chairs of parish councils haven't got a clue that that's the case. And I think that we have to be very careful when we start saying, well, chairs of parish councils will be treated in the same way as the executive. The executive get paid. Parish councillors, as some of us well know, don't get paid however many hours and however many years we've been doing it.
Yeah.
So I want to question that very strongly.
Yeah. Valid point. And there are a number of us that are dual-hatted. Myself and Councillor Runciman that I know of. I don't know if Councillor Fenton is a parish councillor or if our Labour colleagues are parish councillors, but certainly myself and Councillor Runciman are parish councillors. I'm the parish councillor on 2 parish councils, as well as being a City of York ward councillor. I've got some thoughts that I want to just, in terms of moving it forward, I'm just aware of time. Any other members want anything to say about what we've got? Joe, always
I'll
happy to
make
hear
a
what you have
range
to
of
say.
points on different issues. You can take them away, do what you want with them. Some of it's based on cases which are around. One is a clarification as to whether if an employee claimed unfair dismissal because of the treatment by a councillor who was not an office holder, would that end up in an industrial tribunal? I think it probably would. And I'm not a personnel specialist, but I think it probably would, because this is a statutory body and every member of the authority is a member of the statutory body. So the behaviour of an individual councillor in relation to an individual employee has all sorts of potential downside issues. And I'm not sure that that comes through. And it doesn't have to come through in this detailed document. One thing I would say about this document, it could do with a plain English supplement which says this does not form part of the regulations, but here for your clear understanding is the way we would try to clarify. And that would be both for councillors and for complainants, because there's almost a silly variation on which is an individually strongly held view isn't necessarily an individually strong issue when it's looked at externally, because people feel very strongly when they complain, and they can't understand why other people don't think it's a valid complaint, but they have to come to accept, without trying to get the tortured language of a document like this, that it's possible for people to look at their complaint individually and say, no, this doesn't fly. You may feel strongly, but people who've looked at it don't feel it so, because some things seem to come round and round again. So linking they're almost the two extremes. On the one hand, people shouldn't expect councillors to be flogged and whipped because they think they should be flogged and whipped. But on the other hand, councillors have to be rather careful about their individual behaviour. And I gave the example of an employee, because it can impact quite significantly on the council as a body corporate, which is a financial issue, but also on the council as an organisation that the community ought to be able to look up to, and individuals can bring the council into disrepute. So can some of that stuff be covered off in a kind of softer briefing note, which isn't trying to say this is the core of the document. So there's a kind of a reasonableness argument which ends up in this stuff, which is reasonable people trying to make a reasonable interpretation of different and complex situations, which often doesn't suit one side or the other when it's been raised. My contribution.
Okay, thank you, Joe. So I'm just, anybody else wanting to make any contributions? So Please do, yeah.
So just responding on the point about the.
Francis, look up.
Sorry, just to respond on the point about the employment tribunal, I think there is a risk that a decision reached by a standards committee, which does concern an employment relationship, would be used evidentially in an employment tribunal, when clearly that's not the point of it. So that's I can see that that's a risk that might happen.
So but that wasn't the point. The point I was trying to make is, if an employee resigns, saying this individual counsellor, not necessarily a counsellor in a position of authority, because of the way they've treated me, and they may have, and the reason I would be aware of it, they may have raised it as an issue that might come via you in relation to this. But they have raised an issue that a counsellor's behaviour in an employment context, and I'm an employee, is unacceptable. And whether that is a generality rule about an individual counsellor and an individual employee, where they're not a member of the executive necessarily, they are a counsellor. And that's a worry I would have, potentially from reading some stuff that I've relatively recently read.
Okay. So, as is mentioned on page 29 of the report, myself and Mark met on the 12th of September with the monitoring officer and the deputy monitoring officer to look at this and to bring some common sense changes to the joint standards procedure. They are linked, but there's a lot of information there, but essentially they're in the document that you have in front of you. The mechanism to see these changes implemented is to go through the new working group that's being set up to look at the constitutional, trying to find where it is, constitutional something, what we called it.
Institution working group is to be set up.
Right, so the constitutional working group is to be set up, and you'll be aware, or you should be aware that will be two members of the Labour group, two members of the Lib Dem group, and a Conservative within that group. So the idea is that we feed through to them some of these changes and suggestions that we've made. That will then ensure that when it goes to full council for approval, it will have been properly scrutinised, and we will be able to see what those final suggestions and recommendations are at this committee. So I'm pretty sure that that this committee will be represented well within that working group. So that's what I propose that we do, that we allow these changes to go forward, and we will see what comes out at the other end in terms of the recommendations.
One point.
Yeah.
There's mention of Leeds City Council at one point. I can tell you.
There is as an example, yeah.
And there's also a member of North Yorkshire.
Yeah.
So when we get to the final version, can we have it Yorkized, if there is such a word, and those references taken out?
Yeah, I think, and I may be wrong, but I think those references were in there just as exemplars. Yeah, absolutely. But we will ensure that it is Yorkized as best as we can get it. One of the suggestions, or one of the changes that was made, which didn't need to go to council, was that any decisions that were made at that first level, that first tier, would always be discussed with either the chair or the vice chair of this committee. So we would be aware as a committee, albeit through the chair or vice chair, of a decision that the monitoring officer, in consultation with the independent person, was having. I think it would be prudent for me as the chair just to kind of touch base with the monitoring officer and the deputy monitoring officer to ensure that still is happening, because that wasn't a procedural change that needed full council approval. But I think just to keep members appraised that I think one of the issues was that there were decisions being made about complaints that we only got to see when we sat as a joint standards and we weren't aware of, and there was some concern by other members that actually a decision could be made that, you know, as a committee, we actually would have disagreed with, and maybe had the chair or the vice chair been involved in those initial discussions, it may have gone a different way. And that's why we brought that in. So I'm hoping that still is in place. I'm looking now at the Deputy Monitoring Officer who's looking really at me. Councillor Fenton.
I'm a bit puzzled. So are you saying that the chair and vice chair would have a power of veto?
No.
Over the decision made by the monitoring officer in terms of dismissing a particular, because obviously this sets out, the monitoring officer will have a list of criteria.
Correct.
That he or she will use to determine, is this frivolous, is this whatever. So I'm not clear about the purpose of, unless it's for information, for the monitoring officer to say to chair and vice chair, a number of complaints have been received, I've considered them, applied the criteria, and they've been dismissed. And for you and the vice chair to say, that's fine, thank you for letting us know.
Correct.
Or do you envisage chair and vice chair saying, oh, I'm not sure I agree with you on that. Can we have a look? Can we be the decision maker? Because I think that's very different.
It is. So I can answer that very, very simply. So the constitutional position is that the monitoring officer, in consultation with the IP, makes that decision, and that the monitoring officer's decision is final at that first filter. Okay, the reason that we asked for the chair or the vice chair to be involved was simply for information only, and also if the chair or vice chair had an opposing view, and we have had an occasion in the past where that has been the case, the monitoring officer will re-examine that and will reconnect with the IP. But ultimately, the monitoring officer, constitutionally, the monitoring officer's decision is final, and we don't have a veto, and we don't have an ability to challenge that, other than to say, can you have a look at it again? And I think that is how it's worked. Joe.
I was going to make similar points to yours, and I'm made uneasy by your last bit of the response, which is the decision is final by the monitoring officer unless I as chair don't like it.
No, that's not what I said, Joe.
But if you have a situation where the monitoring officer comes to a decision and you merely have advance information to describe it, but that's it, that's fine. If you say the monitoring officer reached a decision and you say to the monitoring officer, please review your decision, that means the monitoring officer didn't reach a decision. The monitoring officer made a recommendation, and in your view, they need to reconsider their recommendation. That is moving in a totally different direction. If I were the independent person associated with that, I'd be very uncomfortable with the suggestion that I give some advice to the monitoring officer. The monitoring officer made a decision. The chair of the committee says, you ought to rethink that decision. And the monitoring officer comes back to me and says, I know I said this is what the decision would be, but actually the chair doesn't like it, so I'd like us to reconsider it. That is potentially, I think, quite dangerous. So if you are simply saying we're seeing the quality of the decisions that are being made by the monitoring officer in conjunction with the independent person, and you might bring that as an issue back to the full committee when you've seen 2 or 3 things that you're uncomfortable with, although the committee themselves could do that as well. That's okay. But any suggestion that when the thing comes up to you, it should be sent back down again means it wasn't a decision in the first place. It was merely a decision unless you don't like it.
So I hear what you're saying, Joe, and forgive me. I think the wording that I use is probably slightly misleading. So I maintain the position that the monitoring officer constitutionally makes the decision on whether a case goes past that first level of filtering or not. He or she does that in consultation with, it's not the IP's job, they do it in consultation with the IP. The decision is made by the monitoring officer. The monitoring officer also seeks the views of the chair or vice chair, because that was the whole idea, that we got eyes on the case, as it were. But ultimately, that decision is made by the monitoring officer. If we had a different thought and a different process, that would filter into the final decision that the monitoring officer says. We don't get a final decision. So what I think, just for clarity, Okay. Part of that process is to consult with the chair or vice chair. The final decision is the final decision. If as part of that process, so as an example, I can only give you an example where I was involved in, it was the last monitoring officer, so it wasn't our current position. So we had a situation where a complaint was made. The monitoring officer asked me for my views as the vice, I think I was the, well, whatever, but I was the chair. I looked at it, gave my view. The monitoring officer had a consultation with the IP, which again wasn't yourself, and came up with their decision. Okay. She then communicated that decision to me and explained why my thoughts were not the right thoughts. And in other words, so this is what we've done. The idea is not that we have any sense of veto. We cannot call the monitoring officer to revisit a decision that he or she has made. And I'm not saying that we can. What I'm saying is that so that there's some sense of transparency, and so this committee has had eyes on a particular case before it comes, when we only meet once every 2 months, and we get a list of where we are with complaints. And what we didn't want to happen was for a list of complaints to come to this committee, and we find that complaint ABC was dealt with, and we had no idea. And that was the whole idea about the chair and the vice chair being consulted, but the decision finally is the monitoring. Councillor Fenton.
So the concept of the chair or vice chair being consulted, is that codified anywhere in? So this is all outside of procedure. So this is I think quite concerning. If that's what's been happening, I think the last thing we should do is actually then try and hardwire it into a document. If things have been happening that shouldn't have been happening, I'm not sure why we would want to reverse engineer it into this document. I'd welcome Francis's comments.
Thank you, Chair. So the only part of this procedure, which is the procedure that I have been following, because when I look at a complaint, I look at Appendix 29 to find out what to do with it, is the IP, sorry, the chair or vice chair has a written role in here where there's been a failure for informal resolution to be effective. So that is on page 67 of the papers, and it's a new paragraph 17, that if the subject member refuses to engage or somehow it's not successful resolution, that's where there's a provision for the MO to approach the chair or vice chair if the MO and IP are not in agreement. And you can see my comments in relation to that I'm not, that wouldn't be my legal advice, that would be the correct approach.
I agree with Francis's comments in relation to paragraph 17.
Right. Okay. So I mean, it's not written into the, to answer to your question. It's not written into the Constitution. It was agreed, maybe as best practice, which is why I'm kind of throwing my mind back several years when it was introduced, and you know, the idea was that as a committee, we would at least have had eyes on something before it came to committee. That was the whole kind of, not to have any influence, but to have eyes on it. Now, it clearly just from where we're at, bearing in mind this thing's been written and rewritten and it's about to be rewritten again. You know, if I'm honest, certainly in the last 12 months, I've never been approached by the monitoring officer or that deputy monitoring officer about a case. So clearly it's not happening, but I kind of brought it up because it was something that was agreed as best practice. Clearly it's not happening. And I suppose the reason I've kind of brought it to the mix is, you know, is it something that we think as best practice should happen? I'm more than happy to take views from around the table.
I'll stop talking a minute.
No, not at all. No, it's
No, but
really valuable.
I
what
think
we-
it's really helpful, and apologies for my questions are hugely naive, but I just take it as I find it. I think if things were happening that perhaps were outside of what's set out here, then it's useful to be aware of them. Probably I wouldn't describe, it may not have been best practice for me, common practice that it was happening, but it wasn't codified in here. We can then have a discussion, as you say, as to whether we want to codify what was happening. But I think the way I see it, there's a role for the monitoring officer in the IP, and in terms of that initial screening, and I think we should be very careful about introducing a role for the chair and vice chair in that process, in terms of we should only have eyes on something when there is a need for us as a committee to have eyes on something, rather than out of interest, or perhaps to say, could you look at that again, because that leads down I think a problematic path, not least for the chair and vice chair, in terms of so I agree with Francis' comments, but as you say, it's something that can be sort of further discussed when this goes to the working group, who will look at it in detail as well. But I think unless it's codified, it shouldn't be happening. I think that's got to be our kind of.
And I'm comfortable. I'm comfortable with that. I just I say it was something that was best practice. It's not in any of the document, which is why I brought it to the table. And I totally accept your point that it if it's common practice or best practice, it needs to be in the document, and it's not at the moment. Whether as members you feel it should be or not, maybe that's for another discussion. But in terms of moving this particular point forward, I think we've got the framework. We have the working group, and we'll be feeding into that working group, and the document that we've got, the substantive document that we've got here, effectively is what will be fed into that working group, and we'll move it on. All your points are noted, and all your points are very, very valid, and I do appreciate your openness. I'm just going to ask Chris, because Chris has been on this committee as long as I have, and Chris may have in fact, Chris has been on longer than me, if I'm honest. Chris may have a different understanding of what we'd agreed all those moons ago. No.
Yeah, I listened to the exchange with interest, and I take your point entirely. All I would say is that sometimes it's very difficult to put down in writing everything that might happen and cover every contingency. I wouldn't want to actually take a position on it, because I'm a member of this committee rather than the chair. If you feel that it is something that needs to be written down and quantified, then so be it. I would have thought that the difference between consultation and influence is quite marked.
Good.
But I wouldn't go any further than that. Yeah.
Good. Right. Thank you, Chris. Okay.
Councillor Melly was half indicated.
Councillor Melly, I do apologise. You're closest to me. I should recognise your hand.
Well, I wasn't sure whether to ask my question or not, because I am on Audit and Governance Committee, so I'll have a chance to see all the proposed changes to the Constitution. But in terms of input from this committee being fed into that, I was just wondering if I could ask a question about one of the proposed changes.
Yeah.
It's on page 65. It was paragraph 8, but it would be 11. Where it did say the monitoring officer would notify the subject member of a complaint within 3 working days, whereas now there's something inserted, which is that the monitoring officer would only notify the subject member of an in-scope decision. And I was just wondering why that was being added, why members can't be made aware of all complaints against them, whether they're in scope or not.
The answer to that is they can be, but there can be, if there were to be a large volume of vexatious complaints, for example, that the monitoring officer immediately could say, well, it's going nowhere because it's just, not even possible to constitute a breach, then it would feel almost like harassment of that member to pass that on, because it's a stressful thing. So it's a discretionary thing. If it's going to cause stress to a member to alert them that someone's complained about something which the monitoring officer has decided is not even in scope, capable of being moved forward through the filter, then is there a benefit? I suppose that's for members. That's for members to say the monitoring officer can or cannot. It's, you know, what the members want on that. There's no legal position on whether they must notify about all complaints or whether they only notify of in-scope complaints. There's no rules about that. The arrangements that the City Council adopts through its constitution are entirely at its discretion.
Thoughts, please?
In which case, as a member of the Audit and Governance Committee, I would find it helpful to have some direction from this committee on an opinion on that.
Yeah. So I'm happy to open this up, but my opinion would be that the issue is nobody sees what complaints are brought in, whether they're vexatious and dismissed at that first filtering or not, or whether it goes all the way. The only people that see the named complaints are those councillors around this table. So could you imagine if you hadn't been informed of a complaint that wasn't in scope, and then you're on this committee and you read in the papers and you think, oh, I've had 3 complaints about me. I wasn't aware of that. So, and again, it's coming back to what Councillor Fenton said about treating councillors differently, because in a sense, you're going to treat councillors. So you then say, you either say everybody will be informed of a complaint, whether it's in scope or not. You'll be informed pretty quickly that it's not in scope, or you'll be informed within 3 working days. There's been a complaint against you. It's gone through the filter system. It's not in scope. Nothing to worry about. Personally, I'd rather have that. I'd rather know that someone's made a complaint against me and it's not in scope, rather than not know, come to this committee or sub on this committee, you know, and you suddenly find, oh, complaint against me there that I wasn't aware of, and it wasn't in scope, so that's fine. So that's kind of my thoughts, and I don't know what other members have got.
Chair, in terms of what the committee receives in terms of the named live list is exactly that. It's the live list. So if it hadn't made it through the filter, it's not going to make it onto a live list. So you wouldn't come as a member of this committee and see, oh, I'm on a live list, because the monitoring officers effectively said, not in scope, going nowhere. We're not even passing it on to you for your comments because we don't want to harass you with what we've deemed to be a vexatious complaint. But if members want to know about complaints, even which the monitoring officer has deemed out of scope because vexatious or whatever, repeat thing, a person might, for example, make 20 complaints all about the same thing. They'd fall foul of the filter because they're a repeat. You know, they've been dealt with, but you would then be notified 20 times. If you're notifying pre-filter, obviously there'll be a larger number possible to do. If you're notifying only post-filter, there's going to be a smaller number, but it's only post-filter complaints that would make it to the live list.
Just in Councillor Fenton.
I think a pragmatic approach may be, if any councillor would like to know how many complaints have been submitted and have fallen the first hurdle and not made it through the filter, that information can be requested by any councillor if you want to know how many people are unhappy with your behaviour or your performance or whatever. Then I think it's up to each councillor if they wish to do that. Some may want to, some may not. I think as long as that provision is available, again, without requiring officers to produce vast amounts of information that may not be needed and actually may cause undue stress to members.
Okay, I will come to you, Joe, in a moment. I'm just keen to hear from our other 2 elected members what your thoughts are, Councillor Baxter and Councillor Runciman. Just hit your microphone and let me know. Or not, as the case may be.
I have no idea what you're talking about. I'm sorry. I got the live list. That's fine. I got the live list. And then unfortunately Stephen turned his head around, so I couldn't hear what he was saying. will the clearest speaker in the room, Chair, just
I
repeat
will-
it
I
for
will-
me?
I will briefly praise it on page 65, at the
Yeah.
bottom of page 65. One of the suggestions is that the monitoring officer will notify a subject member of a complaint within 3 working days. And what's being suggested as an insert is of any in-scope decision. In other words, if there's a complaint made to you which falls at the first filter and is therefore not in scope, you're
Yes.
not informed of that particular complaint. And that was the discussion around whether we feel we
And
want
the-
to be or not.
The individual person complained about won't know that complaint is in. Is that what you're saying?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think Francis was saying that if somebody made 20 complaints that were all vexatious and all fell at the first hurdle, you know,
Yes.
would that subject member want to know that or not?
I think that's a very difficult. That's happened. I don't think it's 20 complaints, but certainly we've had multiple complaints
yeah.
about the same thing, or about the same person, or about the same incident. I think we have to be careful. Stephen, what did you say?
I said that if any member wished to know how many of these complaints had been filtered out, had been made, then every member is capable of requesting an complaint.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's easy if you say on the documentation that currently exists, they won't be told. It's de minimis minor. As soon as you start reasonably saying, I'm not happy with that approach, you're going to have to write some slightly more complicated procedures to cover it off. Do you tell the person who's been complained against who's made the complaints? So do you fold them all the documentation, or do you simply tell them there've been multiple complaints made by one person? You do actually need a procedure which currently doesn't exist. The procedure at the moment is suggesting that's it, it's rubbish and it's going nowhere. As soon as you say it was rubbish, it's going nowhere. But in the case of some of you, we like to stress you by telling you that it's happened. In the case of others, we're giving you information because you want to know about it. But what is that procedure to be?
I think I'd still go with Stephen's suggestion that if people want to find out what's gone in, but we tell people that that their complaint has been received at the very least, don't we? And I think we don't.
No,
We did.
No, that's what we're saying is that, so at that first filtering, the monitoring officer in consultation with the IP will decide whether that complaint is in scope or not. Okay. So if a complaint is in scope, you are clearly informed because it goes to the next stage. If a complaint is made and it's deemed to not be in scope, so, you know, Mr. B makes several complaints about the fact that you ignored him in Waitrose when he said hello to you in a very polite way, that would be out of scope. Would you want to know that Mr. B had made that several complaints about you being rude? You probably wouldn't, you know, and I think that's kind of where we're at. So it's only complaints that any complaint that falls under the filter, you won't be informed of. That's what's being suggested. And I think Councillor Moe was quite right in asking for a little bit more clarification, which I think we've looked at around this table. Councillor Moe, your last right of reply.
Thank you. If a councillor was being harassed via the complaints process, even if they weren't told about every single complaint, I would hope that they would still be informed in some way. I think that's quite an important safety matter. My other, I don't know, concern is that if somebody, a member of the public or another councillor has an issue or a conflict or unresolved issue and they feel that submitting a complaint is the way to resolve it, and the monitoring officer says, no, actually, this isn't in scope, the complaints procedure isn't the way to resolve this, and the person who's complained about isn't informed, then that kind of takes away the option of resolving it another way. It doesn't resolve it, it just means it's not resolved for the complaints process. And so if someone's not informed of the complaint, they then can't go away and try to resolve it themselves another way. It's just left unresolved and they don't even necessarily know there's an issue that needs resolving.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just to clarify, the person who writes in, the complainant who writes in and says, I want to complain about so-and-so who didn't say hello to me in Waitrose, we would write back to them and say, we've looked at your complaint. Unfortunately, it doesn't fall within the parameters of the code of conduct, you know, and our standard letter would say something along the lines of, you know, if you're unhappy with this decision, unfortunately, there's not a right of appeal, and it says that all over our process. There's no right of appeal against our internal decision making. The only way you can complain about that is local government ombudsman or judicial review.
But that leaves a councillor with a member of the public who's angry at them, and the council doesn't know that that member of the public is angry with them, which then is a safety concern if you go and knock on their door saying, hi, how can I help? And it might be something that's really easily resolved, like getting in touch with them and saying, oh, hi, I'm sorry I didn't say hi in the supermarket last week. My mind was somewhere else, and then it can be resolved. Whereas if you're not even informed that that complaint's been submitted, you can't go away and resolve it another way, which is the appropriate way. Or, you know, as councillors, we all want to work really constructively and helpfully together. If another councillor submits a complaint with you against you and it's not deemed in scope, and they don't come to you to resolve it another way, then you have a colleague who you want to work well with, and you don't know that they have animosity towards you, and you don't have the option of trying to go and, you know, talk to them and resolve it yourself.
Yeah. I thank you, Catherine. I think that there probably needs to be a wider discussion with members, and maybe this could be something you could take back to your group leaders for your informal group meetings, and just say, you know, what is the consensus? I think we need to have a consensus of elected members to make an informed decision about whether we are told or not told. I think whilst it's good to get the views of elected members around the table, I don't think we can kind of form a policy based on, you know, just a very small sample that we've got around the table. So I think it would be good to go back to your groups, just get an understanding of whether this is something, and then obviously that will be fed back through to the constitutional working group. And when we, because I think I'm on that group, when we look at this particular item, we can then bring back informed decisions rather than what we think. Sorry, Joe.
Sorry, I was just making a point about parishes will be affected by this as well.
Yeah, you're worried about it. Yeah.
Will you write, or Francis write to the group leaders asking them to bring it up at a group meeting so you can be sure that you get a response?
You pick that one up. Yeah, so Francis will write to group leaders. I want to move on. Where time, I'm aware that we haven't deliberately not involved you as parish council members. Any salient points you want to bring on this particular item? No, thank you, guys. And thank you, members, for your helpful discussion on that particular point. Moving on to item number 8 on the agenda, which is the review of the work plan, which is on page 109 of your packs.
Chair, according to me, the 21st of March is full council. So I wonder if that could be checked, because if it is, we certainly can't have a standards committee.
Absolutely. Councillor Robinson, well spotted. I hadn't even spotted that. I don't go that far.
I get a special prize for noticing.
Yeah, absolutely. Name your chocolate bar and I'll make sure you have it. Jane, have we got an answer on that one? Do we have a?
I'll check
it is. Yeah. So I think we need to just change that particular date. Can I leave that with them services to change that date for us, please? Because we clearly can't have it on the 21st. Thank you very much. Councillor Chambers.
Over the past fortnight, there's been a few emails being exchanged about possibility of hearings within the next 2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah.
And as far as I'm aware, no dates have been firmed up. However, there have been also a couple of emails back from the monitoring officer organisation about cancellation of meetings. Now, unfortunately, when these emails come out, they are automated. They have a link in the middle to a calendar, but there is nothing in the header of the email which tells you what meeting is being cancelled. So if there is an automated entry in your calendar, or when you open the link up, it's then cancelled, you don't know it's been cancelled because that's, it's then disappeared out of your calendar. I also suspect that, again, because I'm an Apple user rather than Microsoft, there is no way that I can tell anywhere what date is under discussion, is being cancelled or not. So I'm none the wiser about whether the hearing has either been established or it's been cancelled.
Okay.
So does that make sense?
I think it is Jane, please come.
Yeah.
So I think we'll need to deal with parish councillors separately. So rather than send you a calendar invite, we will confirm that separately.
I mean, if I was on Word, then I don't, if I was a Microsoft user, it'd probably work all right. But the point is, it doesn't if you're an Apple user, because there is no way you can tell what the subject, date is that has just been cancelled.
It's a very valid point, and Jane, you've got to work around
So we
that.
will do that separately. And just to confirm, we do have the dates for assessments hearing on the 30th of November and the hearing.
Could you
on
send
the
me a
8th
sort of
December.
longhand?
And we will send you.
Oh, please.
Good. Thank
you.
Thank you, Chris. So coming back to the work plan. Oh, Mark, forgive me, sorry. No, appreciate that. Thank you. I'm hoping that we'll all go back to work very, very, very shortly, or back to home or whatever it is we're doing. Just on the workflow. So 31st of January. A couple of things that I'd want to bring back to this, if it's possible. I want to bring back the report on member training. I think it'd be good to get some feedback following my email to group leaders and whips. So I'd like that to be on there. And the other thing that I'm really keen on, and I think it's kind of fell off the wagon over the last couple of months, is our engagement with the YLCA. I know we had the representative from the YLCA came to speak to us a number of months ago, possibly even years ago. And I think there's a bigger piece that we need to do with the YLCA around. So we talked about member training, but there's a lot of, so for those that aren't aware, the parish councils, every single parish council, I think bar one, is a member of the YLCA, and I think they've all signed up to our code of conduct. So therefore, as we're changing it and as we're amending it, we need to ensure that our parish council members are aware of that as well. So our engagement with parish councils is really important, and the mechanism for that engagement is the YLCA. Although, as Councillor Runciman's nodding, there are a lot of us on the full council that are members of parishes. So it's not just exclusive of myself and Carol Runciman. There are a number of us that are members of parish councils as well. So I would like, if possible, either to ask somebody from YLCA to come and chat to us, or at least have a discussion at this committee about how we engage more with parish councils and YLCA. Yeah, I'm seeing nods there. And then there'll be the monitoring officer's report on complaints received, and then obviously the review of the work plan. I think it would be useful to bring back in January. I don't know if the working group for constitutional change will have met by then. Do we have any kind of dates for that yet? Okay. I'd like it just as a simple agenda item, just to revisit it. It may not be a long discussion again, but I think we should keep that on the agenda just to revisit that in January as well. So they're what I'm suggesting we have on the agenda for January. The March meeting, there'll be certain items that will come back to the March meeting as a result of January anyway, but we will have the draft annual report that we need to look at as well in March. At whatever date in March that meeting is, but it's not going to be the 21st. So anybody, any other comments on the work plan before we move on to item number 9? So item number 9 is the monitoring officer's report on complaints received. You need to just nudge me.
No, I only half put my hand up because again, I wasn't sure whether to say it. I think that the working group who's looking at the constitutional changes is hoping to have that ready for March's council. So it would be going to the audit, whatever the last audit and governance committee is before that March full council. So I'm sure you could ask the chair of audit and governance whether they can do it in time to send it back to this committee.
Yeah,
You can always ask.
Yeah.
But if
absolutely.
if 31st of March, if 31st of January is going to be the last meeting of this committee before those changes are planned to go to full council, then that would be the meeting when you'd need to have them back.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. Made note of that. So item number 9, which is the monitoring officer's report. So you do have an open list, and it would be prudent for me to just go through that open list with the monitoring officer whilst we are still in the public domain. Again, if you have any specific questions which may name members, please refrain from asking those questions until we go into a closed session. But from the open list that you've got, the public list, Francis, can you just appraise us very quickly where we are with that?
Thank you, Chair. The only update I would want to give in public would be the dates have been confirmed, which Jane has already shared with us. So where it says that there is an assessment sub to be convened, then we know that that has been convened, and where it says there is a hearing to be convened, then that has also got a date fixed.
Okay. So whilst we're in the public domain, do any members have any questions about these documents before we go into private? Councillor Chambers.
This may well have been answered at a previous hearing, in which case I apologise. 2023/07. Essentially, it's been 6 months between the complaint received and a hearing. Now, I appreciate that it says in the notes that the City of York Council lawyer was involved in the process, but it's still, to my mind, quite a long time.
Francis.
The procedure says that we will try to conclude matters within 3 months. The hearing that's been convened for this one is December, so it will make it from beginning to end nearly 8 months. I think 3 months can be ambitious for something which is technical and detailed, but the principle that is retained in the redraft of the procedure is that matters should be brought back to the committee if an extension is required. So an update and a request for an extension, rather than just an assumption made that it's okay to let it drag. That's the compromise that I'm offering up in the procedure redraft. Not an assumption that we should be allowed to go over 3 months, but if we put forward good reasons, i.e. it's technical or we've got a lack of cooperation, for example, in obtaining evidence or something like that, there might be occasions when 3 months is not plausible.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Chambers. So I don't see it open. Is that a hand? It was like a half hand. Go on, Councillor Melly.
Just that in the public version of the report, all of the complainants are listed as residents. Where is one of them officers? 23/14.
I think it says resident because it's trying to preserve anonymity.
Right, I see. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. Joe.
Just a bureaucratic nicety that might make lives of the ease around that. 3 months is always going to be technically difficult to achieve if there are committee meetings every 2 months and sometimes the committee dates move. So it may be that 3 months is actually sometimes an absolute impossibility. So using the word like normally and using a period like 4 months ought to at least allow one full cycle. Because if you say 3 months, it just may not be possible within a meeting cycle to achieve it. So people's expectations are raised of what is actually achievable. And it's words like normally, but reflecting a slightly longer normally period where I think might be more sensible.
Yeah. Okay, we'll take that on board. Councillor Huntsman.
I think if a lawyer is involved, it's bound to take longer.
Yes.
Because you've got to find the appropriate person
Yeah.
with the appropriate expertise.
Yeah.
They've got then to find out whether they can do it and what
Mm.
time frame. So I can understand why sometimes it goes over the recommended amount.
Yeah. And I think the suggestion that we have a formal request for an extension, because that enables us as a
Yeah.
committee then just to challenge and find out what the delay is. And obviously there are some delays that will be understandable and acceptable, and there'll also be other delays that could be avoidable, and could throw up other issues. I know recently we've had, or last year we had a situation where it was effectively a staffing issue, which meant that the delay was not acceptable. So yeah, thank you for that. So in accordance with our agreement earlier, we're going to now go into a private session. Thank you for those that have been watching and those that will be watching on catch up. Thank you for your attendance. We are going to go into private session and we will not be reconvening as a public meeting. So thank you very much for your attendance. So I'll just